Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
business editor Greg Jefferson,
reporter Brian Chasnoff.
As we're recording this, we're a couple of days into candidate filing season. Between now and December 9th, we're going to have candidates filing. It's going to be a lot of stuff happening there, although many of the races that have kind of been taking shape even before the candidate filing began. But I wanted to begin by talking about the presidential race. We mentioned last week that one of the two Texas candidates, Beto O'Rourke, dropped out recently. San Antonio's own former mayor, Julian Castro, is still in the race and says he's in it he's not going anywhere. But one of the things that's been really interesting to watch has been this tension that's developed between Team Castro and Team Buttigieg, the campaign for South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I think it was the New York Times that recently described Buttigieg as the candidate that all the other candidates have come to hate. I think there's always one guy, because people are looking and thinking, this guy's the mayor of the fourth largest city in the state of Indiana. He's 37 years old. And why is he beating us, And, or why is he so Amy Klobuchar has been annoyed. I think Castro's thing with him, O'Rourke and Buttigieg, I don't think O'Rourke really had any conflict with anybody else, but he and his team were really going at it with Buttigieg in the final days. And Castro is looking and thinking, this guy's stole my place in the.
Did you see the latest? Castro tweeted out a misquote.
I know.
Yeah. He misspelled McConnell, which was I mean, it was so pedantic.
Actually, the context is that an LA Times reporter misquoted Pete Buttigieg, saying that Buttigieg had criticized Obama.
Right. He had said the quote that the wrong quote was Buttigieg saying that the failures of the Obama era had contributed to Trump. Mm-hmm. And apparently it was like a noisy, I don't know, was it a noisy campaign hall or something? Yeah. And then the reporter heard what he thought was the Obama era, but he was really saying
the old normal.
The old normal. That's a weird mistake.
Obama.
Yeah, they don't actually
normal.
sound alike. But I could understand why the Los Angeles Times reporter would have wanted to have heard that, because it's a much better. Yeah,
it's a better quote.
Yeah, it's a way better quote.
Ingrained bias. Yeah.
So that came out on Sunday. Julian Castro on Sunday. Later that day. Tweeted something, hey, Pete Buttigieg, you misspelled McConnell. And this has kind of been typical of what's been going on.
Nitpicky and...
Yeah, it's just... And so...
School marmish.
So now people are saying, are you going to apologize? I think he did delete the tweet and said that he regretted that it had been shared so widely.
Right. So I guess the Castro joke was you misspelled McConnell, O-B-A-M-A. Right?
Yeah.
But then Castro had to put out a tweet. He didn't apologize, but he said he regretted...
That's right.
And I feel bad for that reporter.
This happened on social media because other people saw it.
The reporter is the big loser. Although the reporter did, I think, handled it as about as well as
you
he
have
could.
to.
But I mean,
I think everyone in here has probably had to write a correction at some point in their career.
No,
not Greg.
Greg's can't think of a single time.
I wouldn't even know how to do it, frankly.
Of
course we all have.
But that's one hell of a correction.
That's a big
right
Oh
there.
yeah, that's a huge one.
That actually could tip the. I mean, because people were like, I mean. You mess with Obama in the Democratic primary, and you're just it's like you're basically saying I don't want to win. The thing about Pete Buttigieg is that I think one of the things that nobody really saw this phenomenon happening, and Castro and O'Rourke made the case for generational change, and this guy's stolen it, but he's also kind of positioned himself in a way where. If Elizabeth Warren, if you see either Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders as too far to the left, if you're a Democrat who's kind of scared by them, then basically Pete Buttigieg is right there if Joe Biden falters, and he's shown signs that he might. So he's basically in fourth place in a lot of these polls, but he's in a pretty good position. But I think about a week or so ago, he was quoted as saying it's basically a two-person race, him and Elizabeth Warren. A lot of people in the Democratic Party resented it came off as a little cocky.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could understand why other candidates and a lot of their supporters would look on Buttigieg as kind of a dilettante. I mean, he's been he's on his third term as mayor of South Bend.
I think second, but I'm not
And
positive.
that's it. I mean, he's got a great resume. Don't get me wrong, Rhodes Scholar and all that. But I mean, he's mayor of South Bend, Indiana.
It's a little early.
Well, yeah, it's a little early. And actually, I am, I can speak with some authority on this. I am from Indiana. But I can tell you, like, nobody in Indiana actually includes South Bend in the state. We don't actually.
It's a college town, right?
Well, yeah, it's a college town. It's, far north Indiana. It's kind of like, is it, anything that far north is like, it either belongs to like Chicago or Michigan. It's like not actually part of the state.
But he also has a major vulnerability with the minority community.
And that's
Right.
I'm glad you brought that up, because
exactly.
that's the thing that Castro, I mean, the feud between the two has taken on many dimensions. It really started, I think, in debate 3 when Castro infamously went after Joe Biden and said, "Did you forget what you just said on healthcare?" And Pete Buttigieg just took it upon himself to say, "This is what people hate about politics," and so on. And it started getting snarky then. But Castro made the point, that I think he said it was a big risk for Democrats to nominate or to have a candidate who hasn't been able to connect with people of color, and if Pete Buttigieg was doing well with African Americans and Latino voters, he'd probably be at the top of the race right now, because he's very competitive in Iowa, New Hampshire, some of these states, but he's polling really poorly.
Apparently,
with African American
his
voters.
base are college-educated whites.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so Castro had made that point. Buttigieg said, well, if he could take a tour of South Bend with me if he wanted to learn more about it. And then Castro was on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, basically saying, "Yeah, I visited 100 cities when I was HUD secretary, and hey, you could get all of South Bend inside our Alamo Dome." So that's where things are between these two guys.
Yeah, and you kind of get the sense so clearly, Castro wants to be thought of as the former urban mayor, And if you think back to his first and second term as mayor of San Antonio, this city was being kind of, framed as this is what America is going to look like in the future. So I mean, that's a pretty good platform from which to go into the Obama administration and then eventually run for president. So I could see him looking at South Bend and saying, "This is peanuts, baby."
And it's really true. But the thing is about it. I mean, if you're someone like Amy Klobuchar, like I said, who's been openly resentful about whether how this person has vaulted to his position in the campaign, Obama. Not to make that comparison, but Barack Obama was certainly not the most experienced candidate in 2008. I mean, the voters sort of gravitate to the candidate they want, and it's often not based on logic or resume or anything like that. The context for this is that we're going to learn on Thursday who qualifies for the November 20th debate, and it seems almost impossible for Julian Castro to make it. He needs 4 polls, I think, at 3% or above, and I don't believe he's got any of them, and so he's run out of time on that. And just to make the cut crueler, you've got Tom Steyer, Andrew Yang, and Tulsi Gabbard, who, I mean, I don't think Tulsi Gabbard is even really truly a Democrat, but they're all going to be in the debate.
She's running against Hillary Clinton for some reason.
That's right. But he's not going to be in.
Is it too early to start the betting pool on when Castro drops out of this race? Silence. Maybe.
Yeah.
It might be a little early.
Might be a little early. I think he's, he closed his offices in South Carolina and New Hampshire. He's putting a lot of focus on Iowa. He's polling at 1% in Iowa. So I mean, and not being in this debate certainly doesn't help. So I mean, it's an uphill battle for him. But I think he's going to try to hang in there.
It's starting to make me feel sad. He should.
Sorry. So we're going to move to a more pleasant topic. Well, actually, this is not a more pleasant topic, but it's a different topic. Brian, you wrote a piece last week, and this was kind of an update of a story that you did months ago on Courtney Kelly, who is the daughter-in-law of Mike Kelly, the president of the San Antonio Police Officers Association.
And also the wife of a police officer, Mike's son, whose name is John Kelly. So
could you kind of, last week the sentencing happened in this case. Could you just fill people in on what this incident was all about?
So in a nutshell, in 2017, I think it was November 2017, Courtney Kelly was leaving a bar. It was called the Cross-Eyed Seagull. That's I like the name of that bar. Known for its beach-themed cocktails. She as soon as she drove out of this bar in her Jeep Wrangler, she plowed into a Mercedes SUV and injured a couple of teenagers inside. One of them pretty badly. I think he had a concussion, was bleeding from the back of his head. She didn't stop. She drove down the road and pulled into an apartment complex and called her husband, John Helly, who is a police officer. And he's the son of Mike Helly, the president of the police union, longtime president. So she didn't call 911. John, who was off duty at the time, but his area of coverage of patrol, his patrol area was that area, so he knew all the cops who were on duty. He started calling officers. This is all in police reports that I got. And he made the scene. I guess there were technically two scenes because she had driven away. He started talking to officers on the scene. She was apparently sitting in a stairwell in the apartment complex, so she wasn't even. She was kind of tucked away. She came out. Long story short, she was allowed to leave the scene without taking a field sobriety test, even though she admitted to an officer on the scene that she had been drinking vodka, and she claimed she only had one vodka drink. But a lot of folks, that resonated with a lot of readers. They said, if I had been leaving a bar and plowed into another vehicle and then took off and told a cop, I've been drinking, you probably couldn't have left the scene without some repercussions.
Has Mike Helly? I mean, because what makes this political? There are a couple of things that make this political. I think one of the things is that you have, the fact that Mike Helly, who, as you said, has been the longtime president of the union, is involved in this. Even simply because of the relationship there. Did he ever talk to you, or was it ever clear, like, whether he played any role in how this thing was handled?
Mike Helly hasn't called me back since the Brockhouse fiasco of the previous mayoral election. Yeah. So he doesn't. I did not talk to Mike. One interesting way that the contract played into this story, there's a provision in the contract between the police union and the city where if an officer presumably does something wrong, then the chief only has 180 days or 6 months to discipline that officer. And when that time period passes, you literally cannot discipline them for anything. In this case, she was allowed to leave the scene. McManus didn't find out about the case at all until over a year later. Wow. The real quick recap of what happened. It took SAPD 5 months to charge her with anything and send the charge to the DA's office, and which is not unusual. Sometimes, I mean, that's not necessarily a red flag, although it does implicate the contract because.
Right.
And then it sat in a box under Nico LaHood in the DA's office untouched, and then Joe Gonzalez took over in January. His prosecutors picked it up. Too much time had passed for there to be any administrative discipline, but there are 2 ongoing investigations by SCPD right now, administrative and criminal.
Do you think it's? I'm sorry. I was just going to ask. Do you think it's reasonable to think that if Joe Gonzalez had not been elected district attorney, nothing might have happened with this? Or?
I was never really able to penetrate that question and figure out why that just sat in a box. From my understanding, Nico LaHood and Mike Helly were not allies.
Well, yeah, so, I was curious about the relationship between LaHood and the police union. You just didn't see much of it.
I just heard I heard through my sources that Nico and that there's no love lost between them. So Nico wouldn't necessarily be trying to protect a Helly, but I didn't.
That's true of a lot of people. Yeah. Nico LaHood.
Yeah, and Nico stopped. A lot of people, yeah. And Nico stopped calling me back like 3 years ago. So.
Well, I think the interesting thing about this is that, over the years when we've had discussion about the contracts with the firefighters of the police union, so much of it has been on the fiscal side, about how rich their benefits are, whether the city can afford these things, and that was the focus, I think, of the negotiations with the police union. That I think they ended up agreeing to a contract in 2016, but the secondary issue, which is really important, and it's something you've written about in the past, has to do with some of the terms that are in there that sometimes protect police officers.
Yeah, former Councilman Ray Saldana was really harping on that during the negotiations, and then I guess what eventually got negotiated didn't even address that at all, any of the disciplinary measures. But this really is an illustration of why that provision is not good, because these guys, might have done something inappropriate, It sure appears that way, and they can never be disciplined for it.
Yeah, just because the police chief didn't find out until it was too late,
Right.
or because of
Right.
Greg, you had a column last week that I was interested in. You wrote about this economic development incentive fund that went to Geekdom. It was $250,000,
Right.
and
Basically a gift to Geekdom.
Yeah, like what is the city getting for this?
So the city, the city council last week approved a $250,000 economic development incentive fund grant to Geekdom.
That's a mouthful.
So, yeah, it is. It is. Well, everything having to do with economic development in the city is a mouthful, and I think that's by design. They try to clunk it up, and they fuzz up your thinking. Anyway, so this grant is meant to help Geekdom pay for an incubator program, which is Geekdom already has this program up and running to help startups come to market with a product. Specifically, this money will pay for 6 teams of entrepreneurs who are developing technologies that will help some kind of city problem. For example, linking people who are looking for affordable housing to actual properties. So and this is called CivTech, because of course you've got to have something with a name like CivTech or whatever in this space. So there, for example, there is one startup in town that created a platform that does just that. If you're looking for affordable housing, then you enter your information, where you're, what school district you want housing in, and that kind of thing, and it'll line you up with potential properties. That's a good example of the kind of technologies that these companies will be developing. Now, we have to keep in mind that Geekdom is a for-profit venture. We often talk about Geekdom, and it kind of portrays itself as this beneficent entity, like this, like this charity that's just here to help out, the tech community. It does help out the tech community, but it is before anything else a real estate play. I mean, they are selling, they're renting space to startups and kind of mid-range companies. And that's what they do. That's how they make their money. It's not in any sense a nonprofit. So the question is, why? What is the city getting out of this grant?
It's not a job creation.
Yeah,
thing.
it's exactly. I mean, what the city is getting is the chance to pay for this technology. If they like any of the products that these companies develop. If they think they would be helpful in solving some kind of city problem, they get a chance to actually pay for it. Well, I mean, they get a chance to pay for it anyway. I mean, no matter who paid for the incubation, the city would have the chance to buy that technology. So really, there's
kind of paying on both sides of this.
Exactly. So there's zero economic development benefit from this grant, and it really is just a gift from the city to Geekdom. There's kind of this naturally close relationship between the two.
Was it your sense that there's any controversy about this, or is there any pushback from people?
No, it's funny.
City council?
No, I mean on the city side, I talked to several folks from the city, and it's like, well, I mean, we've got the money available. I mean, what's the problem? I mean, on the city side, you have this kind of alarming history of city bureaucrats looking at technology and saying, I think I know a little something about ideation and incubation. I mean, I think they give themselves more credit than is warranted in being able to tell how do you start a startup and what's the best way to fund that, rather than leaving it to the private sector. On the tech side, I heard from a number of folks who said, we have no idea what is behind this grant. I mean, it
really.
Yeah, and this is not from management of Geekdom, but from other entities, and those from within Geekdom. It's like they did not understand the rationale for this grant at all. It made no sense to them, and the question is, why is Geekdom taking this money? I mean, it's like it comes with rules, restrictions from the city. I mean, if they can do it another way, wouldn't it be better to find some kind of, for-profit or private sector entity to do it? So,
Before we wrap things up today, I wanted to, we so often talk about elected officials on the podcast, and wanted to pay tribute to someone who was never elected to anything and ran 10 times for city council offices over the past 34 years or so. But I think was one of the great characters in San Antonio politics. Bert Ciccone passed away on October 27th at the age of 83. He was a retired Air Force dentist, and then he started a dental equipment company after he retired from the military. And he loved San Antonio. He started running for city council, I think, in 1985, and then over the last 20 years or so, it pretty much became like every 2 years he was just going to run. And he lived on the north side, he actually came really close once in 2003. He ran, made it to a runoff with Art Hall in District 8, and actually got 34% of the vote, the most votes of anybody in that election, and lost by 50 votes to Art Hall in the runoff. And I heard somebody mention, it was kind of a funny comment somebody made about how that once the runoff happened, like he didn't really do any advertising or anything like that, right. And there was some thought like maybe he didn't really want to win or something. I don't know, but Bert was an interesting character. But just to give you some sense, as the years went by, it sort of became this thing where he was going to run, but it wasn't. I'm not just running because to win. I'm going to kind of shine a light on an issue. I think he was realistic as the years went by that his chances were not great to win these elections, but he thought, I'm going to make the point of this campaign will be he'd usually spend his own money and not try to get contributions, but he would focus on an issue. So like in 2005, he ran to get a property tax freeze for seniors because that was on the ballot. It passed. 2 years later, his campaign, the rest of the campaign was to extend council term limits. A year later, he got on the ballot. It passed. In 2014, his big thing was a charter amendment giving council members a living wage. A year later, it was on the ballot and it passed. And he, for the first time in his life, this past year, he ran for mayor. I think he got about 500 votes. Endorsed Ron Nirenberg and helped push him over the top in the runoff. Yeah. But Bert, his big issue this time was workforce development, saying that we should have free community college, which is going to help, work with workforce development. So he was always a very civic-minded guy,
Yeah, and there was, Alamo Promise, which kind of did just that. I mean, so he was ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. It always, Bert was sometimes he got kind of lumped in with all of the other perennial candidates, like Mama Bear and Commander Idrogo, and all of those. Mm-hmm. And that was so unfair. I mean, he was always he was a thoughtful candidate. He struck me as one of the most civic-minded. Yeah. Politicians I've come across in maybe ever. Like on the local level.
So why couldn't he ever just pull through?
Yeah.
Good question.
It is a good question.
Well, I think part of it is because he did believe in self-funded campaigns, so his reach was always limited. He didn't really have the politician's personality on the hustings. I don't know how he played in front of big groups. Probably not particularly.
He also didn't really. Even after all those campaigns, he never really. I don't think it was so much he didn't get the hang of it. He just didn't have a desire to do this. He just never really built an organization.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, I'm going to spend my own money. I'm going to do some ads. I'm going to try to get the word out. But it was the thought of I'm going to build an organization that's going to go block walking for me.
I bet he had great teeth, though, right? Like Joe Biden?
He did. And he was a great character. I would occasionally meet with him for lunch at Las Palapas, one of his favorite places. And he would usually say, beforehand, ready for a scoop or want a scoop. And when I would meet with him, I say this with affection because I love Bert, but it was rarely much of a scoop. But but it was Bert just liked to hang out and talk politics, and I realized after he passed a couple of weeks ago that. I mean, he had this kind of relationship with there were a lot of people, groups that he would get together with, and they would just sit and talk about politics all the time. And the funniest thing, and John McCormick, for those of you who haven't read it, John McCormick of the Express News did a great piece on him that ran this past week. And one of my favorite bits in it was the fact that his son said, that this last time he said it was almost like an addiction. He would just keep running for office, and he said this last time when he decided to run for mayor, we found out about it by reading the paper.
He kept it secret.
Yeah, just because they really weren't going to tell you. So anyway, so Bert, I think, contributed a lot to the city, even though he never got elected, and just wanted to say rest in peace, Bert Ciccone, and we're going to be back next week. We'll catch up with you then. Take care.